The reading this morning is from Matthew, chapter 20, verses 20 to 28, and you'll find it on page 988 in the Church Bible. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling down, asked a favour of him. "What is it you want?" he asked. She said, "Grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom." "You don't know what you are asking," Jesus said to them. "Can you drink the cup I am going to drink?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father." When the 10 heard this, they were indignant with the 2 brothers. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Amen.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much, Helen. Well, as you know, we are continuing our series on Jesus, the ultimate rebel. If you're visiting us, and we've been looking at this now for a week. It's only a week, isn't it? Seems a lot longer, but it's something that is a passion of mine, and I want us to really get back to looking at who Jesus is. Because the sad thing is that in all the trappings of Christianity and in all that we do and think and say, we lose sight of what sometimes it is actually all about. And it's all about him. And it's not about churches and chapels. It's not about song and hymn choices. It's not about our personal preferences for worship or styles or whatever. It is actually, when you boil it all down, about Jesus. Now, in all seriousness, whatever your friends might think or say or rib you about in regards to your faith, the reality is no academic or historian denies that the man, Jesus of Nazareth, actually existed. Dawkins believes that. Christopher Hitchens believed that. But as many of you know, there are people who will sometimes say to us, well, you know, your faith is a load of nonsense, because they themselves don't realize that actually this man Jesus did exist. They think that he's some sort of mythological or fairy tale type figure like Humpty Dumpty. And that's the way they see Jesus as well. So, no historian, no academic, seriously, believes that. They recognize that this man, Jesus of Nazareth, really existed. They can look back in history over 2,000 years. There are volumes and volumes written about the person of Jesus, written by people who are not Christians, who will not say for 1 minute that they follow Jesus or anything like that, but because he existed, he is noted about. So nobody, dare I say it with any intelligence, denies that Jesus has existed. And I think it's important to get that out there, because I know that certainly when I was in school, that was one of the things people would say to me, you follow somebody that's not real. But actually, no, I follow somebody who did live. So if you've got any intelligence, you can search it out and discover for yourself that he really did live. What people deny, what people question, and what divides opinion is this. Is Jesus who he said he was? That's the issue. Is he a fruitcake, all right? Somebody who had delusions of grandeur? Or is he actually what he said, i.e. the Son of God? Is he God in the flesh who came to earth? Or is he just a good teacher? Because many people say that. or he's said some good stuff. I mean, Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount. If we could live like that, the world would be a better place. Of course it would. But is that Jesus? Is that who he is? Just a good teacher? Was he a fraud? Because I tell you this much, he's duped all of us then, hasn't he? If he's a fraud, we are part of a great conspiracy. It's a load of nonsense, is it, this Christianity? A load of nonsense to do what? To make money? To give people like me a job? Hey. What are we about? What is this Christianity nonsense then, if Jesus is a fraud? Well, for 2,000 years people have been following him. The question is, was he who he said he was? As I said previously, when I study the life of Jesus, I don't see what we see on television. I don't see this pale-faced wimp who often gets pushed around. As I read the Bible, I see a guy who's incredibly strong. There is something radically different about him. And in fact, I would go as far as to say the premise of this series, indeed, is that he is a rebel. And he is the ultimate rebel. And in our world, as we said last week, a rebel is anybody who steps out of the norm, whether that's in the way they dress, or in some of the views they've got, or whatever. The problem is, of course, that pretty soon rebellious people attract a following, and what was initially seen as rebellious and edgy becomes the norm. So whether it's piercings, or tattoos, or anti-racist campaigning, those things all started out as quite rebellious things. So when Rosa Parks, remember, stepped up and said, hang on a minute, I'm a black person, I ain't going to sit in the back of the bus anymore, that was rebellious. But today we would expect everybody to be treated the same. Years ago, if you had a tattoo, that was a rebellious thing. You want to see mine? Only joking. But it's not rebellious anymore. Piercings, do you remember that? You know, multiple piercings, one piercing, guys getting piercings. You want to see my... No. Years ago, that was rebellious. It's not rebellious anymore. People do that. So how is Jesus a rebel? What I want to do, as I said, is paint in this series a picture of Jesus as far from fitting into the norm that he was actually a rebel. And by way of introduction last week, I mentioned that the key ways in which Jesus, as I see Jesus, was a rebel were that he challenged authority. And note there, he didn't challenge the law, he challenged authority, particularly the authority of the religious leaders. So he challenged authority, he changed the rules, and he chose the wrong crowd. So this week I want to unpack a little bit more this whole thing of him challenging authority. Or as a more simple definition might be, is that he challenged those who were in control. In life, no matter what age you are, the reality is, whether it's at school, at work, in society, we all follow authority. So we are under authority. If you don't follow what the boss or whatever says, you get busted. So if the teacher tells you to do a piece of work and you don't do it, you will get detention. That's what will happen. Or you will get lines. Or in my case, you get both. Praise God. If you do something wrong at work, you will get busted. You will either be marched into your office with a brown cardboard box and told to clear your desk, or you may be given a disciplinary, you may be given a written warning. If you don't abide by the rules, if you don't follow the authority, you will be had. If you break the law, if you drive your car with a bald tire, I have to get to the garage tomorrow, got to do that. You will get points on your license, or you will get a fine, or you will get arrested. That's the way it works. That's life. That's what you, and some of you now are going, oh, my car. I can see some of you. But that's life. We live under authority. It's been years since I babysat other people's kids, but back in the 50 pence an hour time, when I babysat, I was the authority. I was a Judge Dredd figure of a babysitter. I loved it. I am the law. That was it. Long before remote control was invented. I used to say to the kids that I was looking after, change the channel on the television for me to number 2. And so they would go and do it. Change the channel to number 3. They would go and do it. Sometimes they used to challenge my authority, but I just used to sit there and say, I am the babysitter. Go. You may think I'm unduly harsh, but that's life. I had authority. I was exercising that authority. The truth is, we understand authority, but this Jesus challenged authority. And he did it in 3 particular ways. He challenged the authority of the world and the world's way of doing things. He challenged the world's way of what's presumed as normal. There are some things in this world that we can count on as normal. For instance, if you go to the cinema, it's normal that they turn the lights off. Isn't it? You expect that to happen. Because you're going to go and watch a film, you want the lights down. We've come to understand that at school or at work, it is normal to look forward to Friday. Yes? You know that feeling? Friday! There's some things that are normal. It's become normal, it seems to me, that when you walk into McDonald's, that the person behind the counter has a love bite about there. That is normal. I don't know whether it's part of the job description. I swear to you, I want to say to the girl locally, you're obviously dating Jaws. I don't get it. I don't understand it. Who invented the love bite, by the way? We could go off on a rant here, couldn't we? Who had that idea one day, Thomas Lovebite? I know what I'll do to you, my darling. I will suck and suck and suck until I leave a bruise upon your body. Anyway. Some things we've come to accept as normal. One of the things that's normal in our world, and indeed it was normal in Jesus' day, was that if you have authority, you have power. If you have authority, you have power, you have importance. And that's the way of the world, isn't it? If you've got power, you have prestige, you have status. If you have power, you've arrived. That's the way of the world. And then you get this reading from Matthew 20 that Helen read for us, which Jesus just takes all of that and says, I'm going to challenge that. And he says, he calls the people together and he says, you know that in this world kings are tyrants and officials lord it over people beneath them. But among you, it should be quite different. Jesus came along and said, look, I'm not calling you to live a normal life. I'm calling you to live a rebellious life, a life that is not like the world's way. It's actually totally different. And he went on further to explain that in many ways you could call that God's way. He said not everybody's going to be able to do it because this way over here is easy. You go the world's way, everybody else is doing it, that's easy. But I want to challenge that, he said. You've heard it said before that if you want to be powerful, you've got to climb your way to the top. Jesus radically challenged that, and he said, if you want to be great, you've got to serve other people. If you want to be first, you've got to be last. It seems bizarre if you're looking at all of this from the outside. Why would Jesus talk that way? I don't know where some of you are in terms of your faith journey and stuff, and some of this might be coming over to you as a little bit counterintuitive. Well, it is. Because it's rebellious. It's against the way that the world is structured and the way the world works. We live for about, 80, 90 years? And we expect during our time on earth to live our lives a certain way. But when we get to heaven, if we get to heaven, we have eternity. And our time on earth right now is a testing ground for developing who we are, our character. And Jesus says, look, in heaven, in this long, long time that you're going to spend there, there's a whole different economy at work. So if you want to be great in heaven, you've got to serve while you're on earth. If you want to be first in heaven, you've got to, well, be last here on earth. See, he challenges the way things work. It'd be like me saying, if you guys want to be rich, then what you need to do is sell everything that you have and go and live in inner city Newport and be homeless. That's how radical this is. Because you turn around to me and you'd say, no, you're nuts. That's not the way to do it. But that's what Jesus is doing. He's challenging the way that the world works. He challenged behavior as well. He challenged the behavior of the people of his time. I realize some of you might be thinking now, some of you younger ones in particular, well, yes, challenging behavior. My mum's always challenging my behavior. I've got to say to you, yeah, so does mine, all right, and I'm 45. Okay, so does my wife. You know, lots of people challenge my behavior in particular. I don't know what it is, but, you know, don't feel that everybody's down on you. Behavior gets challenged, doesn't it? My mum, when I was growing up, was always telling me to get my elbows off the table. What is it with elbows? Are these sinful parts of the body? I quite like my elbows. But no, I wasn't allowed to have my elbows on the table. Big, big thing. I don't get that, you see, because it's totally weird. You go to a restaurant with my mum, and there's a young mum there with a little baby, and they're feeding the baby, and then they've got the baby, and they're tapping it on the back. You get this, Gareth? You've got all of this coming, Victoria. You're tapping the baby on the back and rubbing it, and all of a sudden, burp! And everybody in the restaurant's like, well done. I got my elbows on the table, all hell breaks loose. Don't get it. Weird. Jesus challenged behavior. Challenged behavior. In Luke 11, he says, how terrible it will be for you, you Pharisees. You remember a Pharisee was a religious leader, somebody who was so concerned about keeping the religious laws and being very prim and proper. In fact, they were more concerned about how they looked than what was going on in their lives. And so Jesus says, woe to you, you Pharisees. You're careful to tithe even the tiniest part of your income, but you completely forget about justice and the law of God. You should tithe, yes, but you shouldn't leave undone the more important things. Jesus is saying to these religious leaders, you can't just worry about external things. You can't just worry about how you look in front of everybody else. I've got to say to you, in all honesty, I don't care what you look like. You know, I don't mind what you wear. To some of you younger ones, I don't mind what you wear to church. Your mum might have an issue with it, but I don't mind. You're here, that's brilliant. But it doesn't matter how big this church gets. Doesn't matter what we're doing. Doesn't matter how much money we make. It doesn't matter what might happen in our own families. The ultimate sign of a growing, mature Christian is found not in the external things, but on what's going on in here. In our hearts. In the Bible, I like the way it's written. Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 gives this definition of love. He says, if I speak with human eloquence and angelic ecstasy, but I don't love, I'm nothing but the creaking of a rusty gate. I love that. He says you can be an eloquent speaker, you can speak with angelic ecstasy, but if you don't love, you'd be like a creaking gate. In other words, if what's going on inside of you doesn't actually matter significantly, then you can do what you like on the externals. It'll matter for diddly squat. If I speak with great words of power, revealing all mysteries, making everything plain as day, if I have enough faith, I can say to a mountain, jump, and the mountain jumps, but I don't love, I'm nothing. If I give everything I have to the poor, even go to the stake to be burnt for my beliefs, but I don't love, I've got nowhere. So no matter what I say, what I believe, what I do, I'm bankrupt without love. Jesus challenged the world's way. He challenged behavior. It's not about what we wear to chapel on a Sunday. It is not about things like that. It is about what's going on inside of us. Jesus challenged that. And sometimes in our world, the behavior that's challenged is when you swear, or when you don't dress the way other people want you to, or when you get a nose ring or a tattoo or stuff like that. Jesus wasn't interested in that stuff. He was concerned with here. What's going on in your heart? What's going on in your heart this morning, I wonder? As you think about this Jesus and you see this rebellious side to him that challenges the authorities and challenges the way people perceive stuff, what do you think? Because the other thing he does, as you can see, is that he does challenge the heart. You show me a guy's behavior, and it's like an autopsy of what their heart is like. And when I say heart, I'm not talking about the blood-pumping vessel in your body. It's this very essence of who you are as a person. Our behavior is a revelation of what's going on inside of us. We've learned that now. Thank goodness for the developments that there have been in psychology and psychoanalysis, where we understand that very often people's behavior, the things that they do, are a result of things that are held deep inside of them. Sometimes it's the way that the emotions find expression. So sometimes we see people locked up in prison for behavior which is outlandish and outrageous. But the question is, how did they get there? What caused them to do those things? Sometimes it isn't as simple as they just did it. Sometimes there are reasons. Yesterday, with a number of us, we were at a conference looking at children's and youth work, and we were looking at Robert Raikes, the founder of the Sunday Schools movement. And he understood that although he was trying to do stuff to help people that were in prison, he found that again and again they would be released from prison and re-offend. And he suddenly understood that if he could get to help them when they were children, as they were formative, as they were developing, then he would have a bigger impact on their lifestyle as they became older. How's your heart this morning? How's your heart? What's the essence of you? What's going on inside of you? Our behavior is often a revelation of what's going on inside. And that's not Mark Owen's theory. It's there from the Bible. Luke 6, a good person produces good deeds from a good heart. An evil person produces evil deeds from an evil heart. Do you remember how last week we noted that Jesus didn't get ticked off at the prostitutes or the whores? He didn't get ticked off at the crippled and the blind. He didn't lose it with the lepers and the lame. If you want to read about the anger of Jesus, it was the religious leaders that he got angry with, who looked good on the outside, but were filthy on the inside. They wouldn't lift a finger to help anybody else. He said, blind Pharisees, wash the inside of the cup. The outside will then be clean as well. It's a great word picture, that. If you're going to drink a cup of coffee, you're concerned about what's going on inside. When I was working for the Baptist Union, I used to travel around all these chapels throughout Wales, and I used to get these cups. Have I told you this before? And they used to smell of pledge. Because some poor dear had thought, somebody from the Baptist Union coming, I better clean them. And so duster, pledge, china. Rank. Horrible. Well, the cup looked brilliant. But the problem was what had happened inside the cup. Do you get it? And Jesus uses that kind of word picture. He says, you've got to look at what's going on inside. Don't be so concerned with the exterior. Our world is totally obsessed with the exterior, isn't it? The way we look, the way we dress, the apparel we don ourselves with, the car that we drive, everything is so, the whole thing of celebrity is driven by that, looks. And yet Jesus is a rebel because he says, forget it, not interested. What's going on in here? What's going on in here? What's going on in your heart? And that's the challenge for us. Sort the inside, then the outside will follow. Our behavior follows heart. Because when we allow sin to just kind of take hold and be ingested in our hearts, it messes us up. You know that, don't you? You're sitting here this morning. Come on, let's be a bit honest now for a moment. Many of us, myself included, will be here this morning, and as I'm talking about these things, we'll be able to identify with them because there's this tension inside of us. Because the world's way is nice. It is. There's some nice stuff out there. And yet God's pulling us, and there's this tension inside of us. Which way should we go? Why does that happen? Have you ever thought about that? Why is there that tension? Why is it that sometimes we just know that something's wrong, but we're going to do it anyway? Why does that tension happen? The reason you feel that tension is because we're created by God. Fantastic little book in the Bible, the book of Ecclesiastes. And in it says, God has planted eternity in the heart of man. Logically, if we're a creation of God, then now and again we're going to wonder about God. We're going to wonder about him and his ways. That's why when we do something wrong, we know it's wrong. Where did that come from? Is that an environmental thing? No. It comes from the fact that God is trying to draw us into a relationship with him. We were created. And in creating us, God loved us enough to give us free choice. I mean, that's an amazing demonstration of love, isn't it? He loves us so much that he gives us free choice. God's not pulling the strings. He's not the master puppeteer. He said, I love you. Go, live your life. I long for you to know me, but that's got to be your choice. And for many of us in this room, we've discovered what it is to know God in a personal way and to enter into a relationship with him. But there's this tension all of the time, pulling at us. So we end up saying things that we shouldn't say and having to ask God for forgiveness. We're not squeaky clean Christians, are we? Come off it. None of us are. And for some of you who are checking this whole Christianity business out, there's this tension inside of you. You're thinking, well, yeah, maybe God does have a lot for me, and maybe he does love me, and maybe he does have a purpose for my life and stuff, but I actually quite like what I'm doing. So is it money? Is it a career? Is it a relationship? Is it sex? Is it power? Is there that tension inside of you this morning? Because he's challenging your heart. This rebellious Jesus is challenging your heart. He challenges authority, and it brings a tug of war, a holy tension. How do you resolve that? Let me finish with this. How you resolve it is you become a rebel. You become a rebel. Jesus is a rebel, and he wants you to become a rebel. You step out of the world's way, and you go God's way. You step out of the norm, and you go the other way. How? Well, you start by choosing God's way. You may have been living the world's way your entire life, but there's a decision you've got to make. However young or old you are, there is a decision to be made. Which way are you going to go? God's way? The world's way? The norm? Or rebellious? It's not easy. Look at what it says in Matthew 7. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to the world's way. It leads to destruction. Many enter through it, but small is the gate, narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. You imagine a big room and the doors open up and you look in and it's the world's way. You see noise and activity and partying and fun. You see all this stuff in there and it looks so attractive. It's a wide open door. But what you don't see across the room, across the crowd, at the end of the room, you don't see the pain and the destruction and the consequence of so much of that. It looks attractive. Then you walk over to another room. It's pretty much the same, but as you look into that room, it's empty. There's a bunch of other doors at the end, and when you compare the two rooms, well, one is very drab, it's boring, but the other looks exciting. And yet if you would but step into the room and open up one of those doors and walk through the hallways, you'd come to a hallway of forgiveness that God says, I love you, and I want to deal with that stuff that you're carrying in your life that you've done wrong. You come to a hallway where God says, come, receive my joy. Receive my peace. That's the reality. When my daughter was about 2 or 3, I remember taking her to that great cathedral, Toys R Us. It's a great place, isn't it? I want to sneak back in there sometimes now. But it was a birthday or something, and I can remember saying to her, Katie, you can have anything you want. Anything you want at all, you can have. I know some of you are thinking, you were mad. But she couldn't read, so that was fine. So if she pointed to something and it was £100 or something, I could just say, out of stock, love, sorry. We'll come back next week. No 2-year-olds are going to want to come back next week, are they? And I can remember her choosing this purse, this Barbie purse, pink purse, 99 pence or whatever it was. Wow. She loved it. Toys R Us, all of that stuff, that's what she wanted. I nearly said to her, you can have 2. That would be greedy. I thought about that this week, and I thought that that's like many of us, you know. The problem is we don't even step in through the door. We don't cross the line. It's like we just go through life on this treadmill and say, oh, I love that. I love that. We settle for second best in our lives. God is saying, come on. Come and have it. Jesus says, I came to give life. Life in all its fullness. So he challenges us. He challenges your heart. If you want to be a rebel, get hold of this. Get hold of this, and every day, I don't know, start in John's Gospel or the book of Proverbs. Don't tell your mum that you're doing it. Just sit down every morning, 1 minute, read a verse. Wow. Could God challenge your heart? Proverbs 15, a gentle answer turns away wrath. What if you went to school that day and tried that? There's so much in this book to challenge your heart. Get involved in a small group. Come and have a word with me. We're going to be relaunching the small groups in the not too distant future. Huge opportunity for us to challenge our hearts. And we need to change our behavior. You don't change your behavior first. You challenge your heart first. Because remember, from here, this affects what we do. Out of the overflow of a man's heart, so he speaks, Jesus said. The autopsy for what we are like is given in the heart. It's not about the external stuff. It's not about what we're doing. It's not about how we dress. It's not about how we look. It's about what's going on in our heart. If your heart isn't changed, your behavior is not going to be addressed. We start with the heart. That's why Jesus goes after the heart. If anybody loves me, Jesus said, he will obey my teaching. Do you love him? What do you think of Jesus? Do you see him as this rebel? Or do you see him as just nicely compartmentalized? This nice religious figure, a good teacher. There's a ton of stuff to think about what I've said this morning. But I want to say to you, there is an opportunity for us all to seriously reckon about who this Jesus is and to get our lives right with him. And when your heart is challenged, your choices will become clearer. It won't become easier, but they'll become clearer. And we'll be able to face this life with all its challenges, all its complexities, all its fears and frustrations and heartache and pain. We'll be able to face it because he's with us. This week we're about, 100 people or whatever it is in here. We don't advertise this church. We don't take a newspaper bulletin in the Argus. The only banner that we have is you and me. Do they see Jesus in us? Do they see hearts that have been changed? Do they see rebels with a cause? People who are going a different way? Are we contagious in how we live our lives for him?